This podcast is brought to you by Self-Wealth, Australia's only fixed-fee brokerage solution. Pay just $9.50 per trade regardless of size and save up to 70% on brokerage fees. Visit selfwealth.com.au and click online trading.
This is Perth Tonight with Chris Ilsley on 882 6PR, the voice of Perth.
I have to say, when I first saw this, I thought, are you serious? Can you imagine the concept where you might have a medical appointment? You've injured yourself at work, you're on a medical appointment, your department head says, I'm coming along with you. You'd probably look at them at that point and say, you're kidding me? It's not going to happen. I'd have to say it's pretty damn invasive. But the question we're now being asked is it really that bad? Dale Kennett is a director at a company called Forensic HR. And he's got some thoughts on this. G'day, Dale. I better turn you on first, mate. This one doesn't want to work. Go for it.
G'day, Chris. How you going?
All right, mate. I've got to say, at face value, I think you are not serious, eh? How many people would feel that they had been completely and utterly violated by such a thing?
A lot of people can feel violated by it, but an employer is obligated to get somebody back to work as quick as they can. Having an employer in on the appointment, it gives another perspective because the employer knows the employee in a work sense, and they can sit together with the doctor and the employee to develop a return to work program that is suitable for all parties.
See, my reading of this, and you'll have to excuse my cynicism, is somewhat different. You got two people in the equation. You got the person who's been injured, the employee. On the other side of the fence, the reality is what you've got is the insurance company. Even if we're talking about the employer, you've really got the insurance company. Now, one could argue that the interests of the injured employee and the insurance company are diametrically opposed to each other. The insurance company doesn't care if your back, your neck and two legs are broken. They want to get you back to work as fast as possible and get their liability off the books. On the other hand, you have the employee who in some cases, and yes, I know, and we all know the story here in Australia of the colloquial bad back, we get all that. But when you have an employee who's been injured and is perhaps feeling a little bit apprehensive, especially if they've been quite badly physically injured and we're talking about physical kind of work, they're a little bit reluctant, they're a little bit cautious, as many of us would be. At the same time, you have the insurance company on the other side that says, get the lazy bugger back to work. And in the middle, arguably, somewhere is what's really happening. In the meantime, I would suspect simply by the mere fact that they're paying the insurance premiums and they want to continue to be covered, the employer is naturally going to lean towards what the insurance company wants and is going to be placed under pressure. So what are we really seeing here? Are we seeing a situation that really does work in the best interest of both parties, or are we really seeing a system that works in the best interests, in this case, of the insurance company?
I think that there are some flaws in the way that the insurance companies do go about their return to work programs. When an insurance company is involved, they have got a rehabilitation provider providing such a service. Normally when those rehabilitation providers have got a person at a medical appointment, it's more than likely some graduate occupational therapist or a graduate exercise physiologist who are only just starting to find their feet. So that doesn't work in that light there. But when an employer is in there, an employer knows what is the history of this person. A good employer would know this person worked here beforehand, and they can help develop a program that is appropriate to help somebody get back to work. People argue about privacy. A good organisation would already have new employees filling in a medical form before they start, which would have about 100 different questions about different diseases, psychological, physical, etc. The Section 79 of the Workers' Compensation and Rehabilitation Act of 1981 says that employees...
by the time everyone's filled out all these forms, are they ever going to get down to doing the job that they were employed to do, Dale?
They do. They do, and having an employer can be beneficial, because I've got a client that makes bolts. Now, when I say bolts, and if an employee's in with a doctor saying, look, oh yeah, I make bolts, everyone will sort of think something that you go down to Bunnings and go get. But the bolts that my client makes are large bolts that are about 300 mil long, that weigh 4 to 5 kilos a bolt.
So we're talking about industrial standard bolts. Correct,
for ball mills.
Yep.
But the employee won't say that to their GP. Whereas if an employee goes to an occupational physician, which is normally a workplace doctor, that doctor will have a better understanding of industrial work and can help develop a program that is more appropriate, which doesn't follow the guidelines of the insurance companies, but it helps work with the employee and the employer to get them back. And statistically, if an employee is working or doing something back at work, they're more than likely to return to work quicker with a full recovery.
See, one of the things that we have all heard, and we're all aware of cases where you've had somebody who's been assessed by a doctor as unsuitable to return to work. The insurance company says, we want them to go and see our doctor. And the insurance company doctor says he or she is fine to return to work. So straight away what you've got is competing interests coming up with different arguments. Now, either both doctors are simply repeating what is in their own interests. That is, the person who's the patient of the doctor says, I'm not ready to go back to work. The doctor who's seen the patient on behalf of the insurance company says, turn it up. You're absolutely fine to go back to work. I can see there being a real problem in that regard, because it seems to me that there is a dispute sometimes as to whether somebody is fit and whether somebody isn't. Now, if for purposes of our discussion you've got two doctors involved and both doctors are, to all intents and purposes, competent medical professionals, well, who's right and who's wrong?
You can go to arbitration with WorkCover WA. Take it to WorkCover and have WorkCover look over it and have them sort of go, well, actually, you know what? This doctor is more accurate on their information at this point in time.
How do they make that assessment?
Through arbitration, you sit down, they would have conversations, a mediation set up, whereby all parties are there to talk about, okay, what's going to be best for this employee.
Because I remember having a conversation with a person who was doing physical labour, quite substantial physical labour, and they've been injured. And their injury, it was quite apparent, was going to be either very long-term or potentially permanent. But certainly because of the physically demanding nature of their work, they certainly weren't in the short to medium term going to be able to return to that kind of work. Yep. And all of a sudden, somebody came up with this harebrained idea about how this person was going to do administrative work. So here you had a person who was 50 years of age, who had never done anything remotely. The only piece of paperwork they ever signed was their marriage certificate. And all of a sudden, some clown comes up with an idea, well, this person can go and do administrative work, when all they'd ever done was manual labour. And straight away, Dale, I find myself wondering, who are the clowns who come up with this idea? Because you're looking at somebody who's never done that kind of work, and all of a sudden, all they're doing is saying, we want to get this person back to work, and we don't care what we give them to do as long as we can give them something, whether they're suited to it or not.
Those clowns are the clowns that really frustrate me out there as well, because they're more than likely these graduate OTs that are in a rehabilitation provider. I see it all the time, whereby traditionally they'll still say, and I've been in an appointment with an employee, and this is going back some 10 years ago that I was doing this, and the rehabilitation provider sort of turned around and said, okay, look, this guy who's been a forky, he can no longer do this. He's been 2 years on this. We now want to rehabilitate him for administration work. I sort of said to him, have you read this guy's resume? And they sort of said, yes. Why? I said, he's illiterate. He can't read or write properly. So how is he going to learn to do administration? However, he was a golf professional in his early days of his career. So as an employer, I turned around to them and sort of said, how about we look at getting this guy retrained in a golf retail environment that suited his background it was non-strenuous work. It was something that he liked to do. And, you know, in that appointment, that guy's face lit up and sort of said, you know what? I think I could do that because, yes, I was that golf professional. I could do this. So this is where an example of an employer being in the appointment can work beneficial, because it's the rehabilitation providers that put these graduates in these situations where they don't know what to do. It's like, okay, well...
Yeah, well, you know why the graduates who are in those positions, I mean, it doesn't take a MBA to work that one out. The reason why the graduates are in those positions is because they're the cheapest ones to pay.
Yes. Yes. And that's where the system does not work. And that's why it becomes important that the employer is in the appointment to, one, make sure that this graduate rehabilitation provider knows what they're talking about. And most of the time, no, they don't really get that far. The employee knows what they can do. They know the pain levels and everything, but nobody can sort of say, okay, yep, you can do that, you can't do that. So if everyone's in that same room at the same time, at the same appointment, it's easier to get to this common ground.
What if you've got two people? I guess the other problem, especially if you look at the scenario where somebody had a manager or some other responsible person who ostensibly is there to look after the interests of the company, and at some point people are looking after the interests of the company, and once again we get back to the interests of the insurance company, because ultimately they're the ones who are providing this treatment because they're the ones who've got to pay the bill. People in many respects, I mean, you haven't got what I would term a level playing field. You know, because if, for example, you're the patient, I happen to be your boss, and the next person sitting across the desk is your doctor,
yep,
my presence there disempowers you. You know, it's like if you say something, what you say may well be held against you. And even if that's not the case, I wonder how many employees would feel that that was the case. And sometimes I think the way that this can really be tested is when you say, well, okay, I want an advocate sitting with me. And mate, I've been asked to sit with somebody as an advocate, and I've got to tell you, the moment I was sitting there, the other person all of a sudden felt that they were less powerful. And the reason being because when I sat there as an advocate for this person, I was going to be their advocate. I had no emotional capital in this. It was all about the letter of the law, what's right and what's wrong. And all of a sudden, the person over the other side of the desk had a whole new attitude because they suddenly realised that they were dealing with a different person. And so I wonder how many of these employees potentially, just by the process, could be disempowered. It
could be the case, but that's where a good organisation would be able to communicate clearly to the employee what's happening here and what's going forward. The doctor should still be able to take control of the situation. So if the employer is saying things that are not right and won't work, it's the doctor's responsibility to turn around and say, no, that's not going to happen, because they're the professional that can answer it. But the employee's got to make sure that the information that they provide to the doctor is the correct, accurate information to describe truly what's happening in that workplace environment.
Which they're going to be a bit reluctant to do in front of their employer.
They could be.
Mate, I seriously wonder if the first step that we don't have to take with regards to this, and I know that workers' compensation's a really murky area, and look, we've all heard, like I said, we've all heard the story of the colloquial bad back and the person who filed the compo claim because they wanted time off and they weren't really that crook. We've all heard those stories, but I still wonder if part of the problem here isn't the fact that the commercial insurance industry is involved in all of this process. Their industry is about risk. They naturally want to mitigate risk. Workers' compensation has to be provided. It's a compulsory thing. Is it something that we need to take out of private hands and put it back into government hands, that premiums should be paid to government departments who should be providing the coverage, not commercial for-profit organisations? Because one might argue that that's not necessarily producing the best outcomes when all they're really interested in doing is mitigating the costs as much as they can, and some would argue even at the expense of patients' welfare.
There is that, but the insurance premiums are actually gazetted by the government. So when an employer, like you can Google it.
All that does is make the situation worse, doesn't it?
Well, it does.
Because all you're doing there is increasing the incentive to mitigate the costs as much as you possibly can.
But I don't think the insurers are the ones that push everything, because at the end of the day, the insurers, they pay out their premiums.
Dale, it's all about the insurers. It is all about the insurers. They're the ones that are driving all of this because they're in it to make a quid. And they don't make a quid if they're paying out. They make a quid if they're taking in. So they are going to reduce how much they pay out, and they're going to try and maximise how much they pay in. Now, you've told me that government regulates the cost. So what they're up against is a system that says this is the maximum that can be paid in, but potentially there's no limit on what can be paid out. Mate, they are going to work overtime to mitigate the costs.
They do, but then they push it back onto the employers, whereby if the risk increases, so do the costs to the employer. So in a real sense, it's the employer needing to make sure that they keep their costs down, because the insurance company pays out all the time, and I've seen it time and time again whereby companies have gone to the insurer and said, look, this insurance claim, there is far more in it than just the injury. There is some psychological areas as well. We need that addressed. The insurance company fails to address it because it's an extra cost, but then it drags on because of those extra areas that they don't address early on. And that's where it becomes important early stages for the employer to make sure that they get in and help the employee get back to work in a positive and responsible way.
All right,
if the employer doesn't do that, then that company is just wasting their money.
Yeah, but you told me in the beginning that the fees that are charged, that are levied, are set by government. So does that not also by its very nature, does that not also limit the amount of fees they could charge even for companies you might argue are being a bit recalcitrant?
No, because the insurers will go, okay, this is the gazetted rate here. However, the risk in your area and your organisation is higher, so we will add an extra 2 or 3% onto that gazetted rate.
So what you're saying is they can go over and above the gazetted rate?
They can go over and above the gazetted rate. So
the gazetted rate doesn't mean anything then, does it? Because the insurance company could just simply turn around and say, yes, but we're going to levy this. So the whole concept about a gazetted rate is, and of itself, misleading.
It is, but it's what the government does, and as taxpayers, we pay the government for somebody to deal with these gazetted rates. Yeah,
we pay the government to be stupid. Well, that's true. we kind of knew that anyway. Hey, Dale, thanks very much for the chat, mate. Got to leave it there.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it. Dale Kennett is the Director of Forensic HR. How would you feel about that if you had some sort of an injury, workers' compensation claim, and you have your employer or somebody representing them at medical appointments for